love tough questions because tough questions lead to great conversation, and great conversation leads to progress.
Welcome to the first episode of The Diversity Imperative, a podcast dedicated to unearthing the agriculture sector's potential. We'll talk with diverse voices and industry leaders to motivate listeners to take their organizations, whether it's the family farm or a life science company, to the next level when it comes to stewarding their most important resource, people. My name is Konschuh, and I'm a grain farmer from Cluny, Alberta.
And I'm Erin Gowriluk, and I lead a national grower association in the nation's capital. Our goal each episode will be to dig into some great conversations that go beyond 280 characters and that seek to inspire a broader dialogue, engaging all people in our sector, regardless of gender, race, and ethnicity, or sexual orientation. Through rich and candid conversations, which consider a variety of perspectives, Hannah and I look forward to exploring ways to overcome barriers and make diversity and inclusion a topic that everyone is comfortable talking about. Now, Hannah, we are not alone on this journey. We are proud to have support from our partner, Syngenta Canada, and in particular from their head of seeds, Dan Wright. Dan is not new to this conversation, and it's due in large part to his leadership in this space that we have asked him to join us here today.
For sure, and we're so glad to have Dan partner with us on the first season of The Diversity Imperative. Dan and I first crossed paths at the Nourishing Diversity Breakfast, which is part of the biannual meetings that the Canadian Seed Trade Association holds. I know that he played a key role in establishing the CSTA's Diversity Working Group, which hosts that breakfast, so we're looking forward to learning more about that. Dan is now the head of seeds for Syngenta Canada, an agribusiness providing leading seeds and crop protection innovations to enhance the prosperity of farmers and ensure the continued sustainability of agriculture. With 20 years of agricultural sales and marketing experience, Dan has developed a deep knowledge of the seed industry while working with growers and agriculture stakeholders across Canada. Starting out with his family's Ontario farm equipment business in Kent County, Dan held business roles with Monsanto and Bayer Crop Science before joining Syngenta Canada in 2019. Dan often extends his leadership skills to volunteer roles, including his work with the Canadian Seed Trade Association, where he was a director beginning in 2012 and serving as president from 2017 to 2018. He believes it's important to speak up for organizational values, and in doing so helped champion the adoption of a code of conduct within the CSTA and more female voices amongst the leadership. Dan's passion for diversity and inclusion and supporting professional growth is well suited to the culture at Syngenta, where he is the executive sponsor of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee.
Thanks for joining us today, Dan.
I appreciate the invitation. It's going to be a great conversation.
So what would you say was the shift or the moment that caused you to move towards this diversity inclusion conversation to become the advocate, leader, and an ally in this space?
I don't know if there was one specific thing. It's a bit of a journey. And I think the more that I talked about it and the more people said, hey, this is important, and the more that I saw that, you know, I could be help move the change. So usually I think somebody called me middle-aged. Some call me old, but a middle-aged white person that some people would say is part of the problem. If we can engage and have more people expand the conversation and be part of the solution, it can make a really big impact. And I think for me, as I started to have some of those conversations and dipped my toe into the pool a little bit and saw some results, it just made me want to engage more.
Okay, and I know Hannah and I want to talk a bit more about those results as well, but we're going to start with something we plan to do each episode here. Hannah and I want to ask one tough question of ourselves and of our guest, and then we're going to invite our listeners to weigh in as well on social media and on our website. So, Dan, are you ready for the tough question?
I love tough questions because tough questions lead to great conversation, and great conversation leads to progress.
Well, there you go. Sounds like you're ready. So as Erin and I were preparing for this conversation, we talked a lot about some of the responses that we've gotten when we broached the conversation of diversity and inclusion, and in particular around gender diversity in agriculture. And we often get a wide range of responses, but there's definitely some consistencies. So the person that says, I'm not touching that conversation with a 10-foot pole, just straight up dismissal, AKA sexism doesn't exist. there's always some nastiness involved, and oftentimes lots of people just can't bother to engage at all. So we know you can't speak for all middle-aged white men, Dan, but in your experience, why do you think the resistance exists to accept the experience of others?
There's probably not one reason. I think there's a lot. I think a lot of my conversations that I've had with people, and again, part of my journey, it's understanding what diversity and inclusion means. And it's really a pretty new space, diversity and inclusion. And I think adding a word to that conversation, equality, has helped me in my journey. And I think as people understand that, can help in their journey as well. I think some of the resistance is around people being worried about their position, and I mean position in their thoughts of where they're at today, maybe anything that they've said in the past. And a foundation for me has been a big pivot and big turning for me in my journey is taking an unconscious bias training and helping myself understand a little bit about where I am. And doing that unconscious bias training, it was a little rough because I actually thought I was in a real good spot. And I did the training and found out that I actually have biases, which from when I did a survey before and did the training, there was a few days and I kind of felt bad about myself for a few days because I have biases and I actually was a person that didn't think I had any biases. But doing the training and understanding that everybody has a bias because you're human, you don't have a bias because you're a bad person. It's really how you manage the bias that can make improvements. So I think a lot of that resistance is the unknown and not knowing where you're at, not knowing where you are in your journey. So I think thought and reflection is a big part of helping people move forward and engage in the conversation. And I would encourage people to, as you engage in it, you see people grow and get better, and people appreciate that. And it's just kind of it kind of builds off things. So, but it's for me, the resistance, I think is just understanding where they are in the journey. Because I really think that people have the right thing right in their mind, but don't understand where they are, and maybe don't see the barriers that there are for other people. I don't, as a white guy, middle-aged white guy, I have very few barriers, where I see some barriers that pop up for other people. And the more, certainly over the last 12 months, I've been watching and listening and learning even more. And what surprised me is that I've seen more and more barriers that I probably didn't know were there or didn't know the level of the barrier.
So Dan, you talked a bit about, the unconscious bias training that you participated in. What else do you think others can do, perhaps other men in particular can do to encourage the openness or self-reflection? Yeah,
well, the word self-reflection, I think, is where it starts. Reflect back and think about where it is. I think that's critical, and challenge ourselves to put ourselves in other people's shoes. So at Syngenta, we've been doing a lot of training. We actually had a recent all-in meeting where everybody's invited to join. We had over 50% of our team members in Canada join, and Hannah joined us and talked about her view and some of her experiences. And one of the barriers that was there that I highlighted, Hannah talked about some things that she does when she walks into a room. And I'm like, hey, I never think about what the room looks like when I walk into it, because in most cases, people look like me, where others don't have that. So, I don't know whether I would have done that as much over the last, as I've continued to learn and educate myself. And I'm 53. It's never too late to learn and continue to learn about all different things. So I think that is a big thing for me, is to stop, listen, truly put yourself in somebody else's shoes and talk to them. I think I've listened more intently over the last while as well, to really try and understand and get what people are saying and continue to learn for them, learn from those people.
I really like what you said about self-reflection and listening, Dan, because in that moment when I was answering some questions during the Syngenta meeting, it hadn't actually occurred to me that what I was expressing was a barrier or something that, doesn't even cross your mind. So that to me is just a really powerful part of having the conversation. Just in having the conversation, it really opens up the discussion. So Dan, we really thank you for being brave and answering our tough question. We really hope that helps to get the conversation going with our listeners and any of our followers on social media. So that was really great. So I really appreciate your perspective here, Dan, because as we stated in our introductory remarks, we hope that we can engage everyone in those conversations, including and especially those who haven't been as open to having them.
And Hannah, there's this great article that you and I have been discussing from the Harvard Business Review. I know it's a favorite of ours. It was written by Daisy Auger Dominguez and about getting over your fear of talking about diversity. And Dan, you spoke to that because I wondered how much of this resistance that we're talking about really stems from fear of the unknown, unfamiliar, fear of getting it wrong.
Yeah, Erin, I can absolutely 100% relate to the fear of getting it wrong and not wanting to offend or not appear that I am knowledgeable about something, because I'm really confident about speaking up about gender, but not as much when it comes to race, which is outside my own lived experience. So I'm endeavoring to understand those perspectives and concerns that are, of course, outside my own realm.
And that article provided what I thought was some pretty solid advice for anyone who is looking to get over their fear of talking about diversity and inclusion. And it started by saying, start asking better questions. So, for example, ask about what you as a colleague or a leader can do to remove the barriers that many people around you might face.
And I think that's so key, and big emphasis on asking better questions, because that, of course, doesn't mean that we ask our colleagues to come up with a solution. It means that we better understand the situation for them and what coming to work every day might be like. The second tip that they offer is to do your homework. So educate yourself on the issues facing women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, people with disabilities, AKA read a book. There's no shortage of ways that we can better inform ourselves from any media of our choice.
Well, and I would suggest that listeners could even start with this podcast and visit the Diversity Imperative website for some valuable resources.
Shameless plug for the resources on our website, Erin. I like it. So finally, the article suggests we have to get ready to lean into the uncomfortable. So create a space for these conversations to happen, accept that you will make mistakes, learn to apologize, and move forward, because this is, of course, uncharted territory for most of us. So Dan, I know that you've had to lean into some uncomfortable conversations to get some of the initiatives going that you have. And we've heard a little bit about that, about how you've tackled that today. But I'd love to know the responses you've gotten in, say, a boardroom setting. So are those responses different between men and women?
Sometimes, I guess, is the answer. I think just on the leaning in part, I've done a bunch of work, and at some point I thought somebody said, hey, you need to lean in a little more. And I thought, I am. I said a couple things. What I realized is I have an opportunity to lean in more and to highlight some more things. So for me, leaning in became more intentional to highlight some of those things. And what we talked about earlier, Hannah, of just, when I saw a barrier, I wanted to highlight, hey, that's a barrier, so people could start to see things instead of let them pass. It didn't take long to highlight that, but it showed, and I think it even made, as you said, made yourself think a little bit, hey, I didn't realize that was a barrier. So I believe that that's important, and that's part of, leaning in can be some very subtle things and some very minor, but highlighting some of the barriers, some of the opportunities, highlighting some of those things as we go along. And I think at the boardroom level, we're in 2021, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. There are a million priorities, and it's how do we get the priorities, and is diversity and inclusion a priority now? I think it's a priority. It's a priority that we need to continue to focus on, and probably even more now in the middle of a global pandemic than waiting and doing it later. And when we were at CSTA, that was one of the first times, we took a big step, and we had a lot of conversations about where it was as a priority. And some conversations went, hey, it's important, but it's not the top priority. Hey, it's something we need to work on. Let's get it on the list, but is it one that we need to move to the top? And until you decide that it is, you just, in many cases, have to say, yes, it is. It is. And I think my learning from it, when we did that, the response, the engagement, more engagement from more people, not just women, both men and women, talking about it and having a really good open conversation about where we were going and what we needed to do. It brought out a bunch of things. It brought out that we need a code of conduct. And we got a code of conduct built in because people felt were given permission to talk about some of the things that were going on. And unless you make it a priority, you don't give people permission to talk about it. And that permission to talk about it for me is critical. You have to empower people to have the conversation, create some safe spots. And we started at CSTA of having an all women's breakfast for safe spots. So some of the things that could come out, but where CSTA is today, it's most at the last women's breakfast that we had, COVID shut down most of our meetings last year. But I think where Hannah spoke, the majority of our overall membership was there to listen and learn and engage, and it was awesome. And so what I've seen is there's a real desire to do that, and it opens the door for a lot of things that I don't think people realize are there.
Dan, you mentioned something that you do that I don't know that I've had the courage to do yet. And I'd be curious to know the different reactions you may be getting when you call it out, when you identify it in that moment. How do people react to that?
I haven't had any negatives, quite frankly, and maybe you don't see the negatives. Probably most people know my position and I haven't had anybody come up and say, I fully disagree and you're going down the wrong way, because I've been pretty strong. Maybe that might be a spot where I need to soften down. So people will come up and challenge a little bit more. I've had more people come up and thank me, thank the organization, thank many others. I'm not the only person. Thank people around the boardroom for creating a more inclusive conversation, which makes me want to do it more. So I think that's how. For me, it's a continued build as you see people come up and do more things and become more engaged and share their great knowledge, because agriculture needs the best people in it to drive us forward, and you get more people having conversation and smart people and getting the best out of people. It's fun to watch, and for me, I think that's the biggest, for sure. There hasn't been a lot of actually nobody come up and say, hey, what you're doing is wrong. I believe that happens. I'm not a fool. That's happening at different areas where people are having the conversation. Do we need to do this? Is that happening? But I think less and less, I truly believe that we're making progress on a long journey. There's a long way to go. So I would say we're still early in this journey. There's a lot of work to still do.
So Dan, I want to turn to think about the teams that you work with, because the ultimate goal and the reason that we are having these conversations is to make our organizations and our industry more inclusive. And I'd love to know how you've seen some of these inclusion efforts come to life. So are there any examples and benefits you can share that have led to greater outcomes, both for the teams that you lead, the individuals on those teams, and of course, the broader organizations that you work with and for?
Yeah, I think maybe one example that I use, and it's a Syngenta example before I came to Syngenta, but I think it highlights barriers and it highlights opportunity, and it highlights trying to create opportunities. And so, one of the barriers as we think about things, and I've seen this over my career, and it's happened a few different times, is as roles become open, not many men will say, hey, my wife is going to go off on maternity leave, so I better not apply for this job. but many females will say, hey, I might, maybe now is not the time. And at Syngenta, before I came, actually, they've hired somebody that was getting ready to go off on maternity leave, was going to work for 3 months and then go off on maternity leave. They wanted to hire the person because they were the best person for the job. And I've also witnessed many opportunities like that through my career where, when somebody goes off on parental leave, somebody else fills in, gets to move up in role and gets to learn and educate themselves and excel in those spots. So I think things like that have created some really big opportunities. Now, that's a little bit harder in some smaller businesses or on a farm where there's less people, but there's contract opportunities. There's opportunities, I think, that continue to think about that and to continue to build it out.
I love that example, Dan, because I think oftentimes women going on leave or anyone going on leave, it can really be viewed as a detrimental, oh my God, what are we going to do now? But I think seeing it as an opportunity for other people to lead and to see where people can maybe grow and initiate new things and not thinking about it as a glass half empty sort of perspective. I just really love hearing that's sort of the way that you've thought about it. So that's just really great to hear.
And I think it's like on that specific, everybody needs to encourage people to do that. I've also witnessed more and more, it's parental leave. So, it doesn't always have to be, and sometimes it gets split up between both parents and somebody might need to go back to work earlier than the other. So they're splitting up the time and taking the parental leave. And I'm seeing more and more of that. And I think it's outstanding and something that we should encourage. And I think, it's a barrier and things we need to talk about. And, as people are planning their career, it's as managers, encouraging people to continue to grow and apply for jobs when they come up if they want, right? And it's choice people will make. I made lots of different career choices in my life as well. When my kids were young, it was super important for me to be able to coach them and be around with them for some sports things. So I didn't want to do certain things in my career at that point because I made the decision that I wanted to be around and be able to coach my kids a lot and do that, and then move and do some different stuff in my career as my kids got older. So all those things are good to do, and we should encourage people to do things like that.
So Dan, in tandem with your current role as head of seeds for Syngenta Canada, as Hannah mentioned at the outset, you are also the lead or one of the leads on the internal diversity and inclusion work that happens at Syngenta. As a company, what's Syngenta's vision when it comes to diversity and inclusion? And can you speak to where you're at currently on this journey and where you hope your work is going to take you as an organization?
Yeah, so Syngenta's on a journey as well. So I think everybody has a journey, and as a company, we're on a journey. I'm excited about where we are as a company. We fully embrace equality, diversity, and inclusion. We believe it's going to make us better. We're going to believe it opens up opportunity for our employees and for everybody in the ag industry. I think by getting it right, our employees can come to work and be their best self. And really, I think that's where we want to get to. I think we're doing a pretty good job. We're not perfect, but I think we're on a really good spot on our journey. We also want to, as we move forward, to do things like this and engage more in the industry. So we're committed to really want to be part of the leading solution in the industry to help growers in industry and the ag segment make improvements on diversity and inclusion and equality. And I think as an industry, it's critical for us to continue to, labor is, it's hard to get labor on spots. We need to be very open. We need to be in a great spot on diversity and inclusion equality so that we can attract great talent and attract people to come into our industry and participate. When my parents closed our farm equipment business in 1990, so it's a long time ago, at that time I had a thought of, and was encouraged by some people to get out of ag. There's nothing for you in agriculture. You should get into another industry. I said, but I like ag and I like everybody in ag, so I want to stay. I think our challenge is always going to be, how do we continue to attract people? And one of the neat things I see at Syngenta and other companies are some of the most passionate people about agriculture came from the city, went to the University of Guelph, or were somebody from a city that went to US or somewhere like that and ran into some Aggies and fell in love with it, and are some of the most passionate people. So that is what's going to set us apart, and something we need to work on as an industry for sure. And I think Syngenta, we're doing a lot of work in this space, both with our, we've got an employee resource group that's there, but also our territory leadership group spends a significant amount of time talking about how we make improvements on diversity and inclusion, and not improvements that are on paper, improvements that our team says this is real. And we started our year off by having an hour-long session open with unconscious bias, and having Hannah join us and having a really open conversation about it. And I think that's where we're at. I feel great about where we are from Syngenta. So like everybody else, we've got work to do. We're early in our journey, but we've made a lot of progress in the last little bit, and really excited about what that looks like.
I feel like that's a great assessment for where a lot of people are at, Dan. So we've made a lot of progress, but we have a lot of work to do. So I think that's just a great way to summarize it. And of course, we applaud all the work that we've heard and seen Syngenta doing on your diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. And I think these are all great examples of the internal work that you're doing that others can look to as an example. And we look forward to staying in touch about that, Dan, and learning how Syngenta progresses along that journey. So Dan, we have one more question for you. We really appreciate your time today. As a partner of the Diversity Imperative, we're interested to know what you hope we are going to cover in our first inaugural season. So what areas of diversity and inclusion are you hoping to learn about that would help you in your personal life or in your executive role at Syngenta?
I'm hoping to hear more stories and learn from more people. And, I think one of the things that we've explored that I think through this podcast will be diversity and inclusion. I think can make people uncomfortable. It's a hard subject. We talked earlier about fear and hesitation to engage. I think just having an open conversation and learning, continuing to learn. I said, hey, I'm a middle-aged 53-year-old white guy. I continue to learn all the time. And I think the more I learn, the more I want to learn. I'm interested to see how the conversation goes throughout this and what we can learn from other areas as well. So you think about sport, that sport is an area that probably hasn't been the most inclusive. People argue that. I think it's pretty clear over the last, but sport's also been a real driver to change and driver to highlight things. And as I reflect back on when we formed girls hockey in the little town that I live in, we really built that and focused on, as we're selecting representative teams, and small towns, very competitive. People say, hey, certain people make a team because of the name on their back. We wanted to make it equal. And so we built our tryout system so that it was equal for all, so that you had some unbiased people in there, and so that you could have a better team. And I think the conversation around diversity and inclusion, I think we can learn a lot from sport, and think about our own kids I've coached lots and done tryouts and done different things. And what people want is their children to have a fair chance. They want their children to have equal ice time. If they don't make a team, they want to know that, hey, their child gave it 100% effort and it just didn't work out for them, and that's okay. But they had an equal shot to everybody else out there. And I think we can learn a lot from sport as we think about agriculture, and we think about, I've got a job description. Does the job description have all the clarity? Are there words in there that somebody would look at and say, well, that probably doesn't mean me? How do we cleanse some of that out so that everybody has the best opportunity to apply and equal for all, and not harder for some.
I think that's a great way to wrap up what I think has been a fantastic first discussion. Thanks so much, Dan, for not only agreeing to be a part of this first episode, but also for being a partner and someone to provide a little advice to Hannah and I as we embark on this journey together. I look forward to following up with you after we've recorded our first season.
Thanks very much, both Hannah and Erin, for inviting me and including me in the conversation. I'm excited to be part of it, and Syngenta's proud to be a sponsor to have this conversation and to make some progress. Like I said before, we've made some progress. I think we need to accelerate the progress that we've made and make real and sustainable change so that we land at the best spot for the industry. So thanks so much for driving this conversation, and it's going to be a great season, I'm sure.
And thanks to our listeners for tuning in to the first episode of the Diversity Imperative. Hannah and I look forward to our next conversation in a few weeks' time. Until then, please visit our website to access the resources that we have referenced here today and to weigh in on this episode's tough question. The conversation continues on Twitter, where you can find Hannah and I at Diversity in Ag, and on Facebook and Instagram at Diversity Imperative.